How's it going, YouTube? Coming in today with another video, and today, guys, what the video is going to be where to Handtrap. Now, I know that everyone's been waiting for this video, and, I've just been getting a lot more into the game again, especially with the ban list. We have the new set, and there's a lot of very exciting things happening right now. I'm not adding in things like Kultun or Enacraft in this, so don't ask, because those decks are just so irrelevant and not good that I'm not concerned about them, and neither should you be. I'm going to be adding in the decks that really will matter moving forward. The decks like the branded Fallen Magistus Dracotail, and then like the Mitsurugi slot piles, things like that you really want to learn and make sure that you are ahead of, right? So definitely go ahead and check out my sponsors over on Gem, Cloud, Arla, Imperium, Dragonshield, RW, MainPhaze, and Grimoire down below in the description. Definitely go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so we can hit our goal at 30,000. Now, for the first time of the new year, let's hop right on into the first slide. So Radiant Typhoon is going to be a deck that you will see quite often. It's not going to be like the craziest of crazy decks out there, but it's something that will be played quite often. And the number one card you want to be worried about here is going to be the Crocea. This card's very good, but it reads like pre-prep. So they're going to be dropping this in the draw phase. And this is to avoid things like Valor and to not get hit with Droll right away. So you want to make sure that you're playing Mourner so you can at least snipe this in the draw phase. You can also Bell this card, which is equally very strong and something that you want to keep in mind because it will come up, and it's something that even playing Bell in this format is really strong against decks like Mitsurugi. If you play against like the branded Dracotail deck, it's also going to be very strong as well. So that's something that you want to have in your main deck right now, even as like a 2 of. Right now I'm on the 3 Mourner, the 3 Bell because it is just that good. Now, you can hit the Chant with Ash. I like hitting Vision, of course, just because it's essentially just Pot of Greed, right? And then enabling your opponent to put something like MST in the graveyard, which for this deck is actually really good for them to have. And you can even DD Crow things like the MSTs out of your opponent's graveyard, so they're not that big of an issue. But it's still going to be something that you do think about here. The Ghost Ogre on Mandate is also really strong. Cutting your opponent off from having this as a resource is really important. The last thing here is things like Swen. If you want to hit it with the Valor Imperm, know that the Wind Spirit could be in their hand and they could dodge it. But it's the same thing as hitting like a Lucius and your opponent having like a Femina, right? It's going to be there if it's there, but if it's not, then you're good to go, right? This is a card that you want to go ahead and just negate so that you don't give your opponent the option to be able to get into more card advantage. But overall, this is going to be a deck that you will see, but Crocea is a card that you do want to make sure that you are hitting with Bell or Mourner because the card is a little absurd. Now for the branded Dracotail deck, there's also going to be like Magistus cards that roll around in some of these lists, so you want to make sure that you understand what those cards do as well. That's why you see the Calamity underneath the DD Crow, because your opponent's going to be summoning out the Fusion Omega, and then using Calamity to pop it, and then go ahead and summon out the Lucius from deck with the Omega effect. So you want to make sure that you just go ahead and get rid of the Calamity preemptively so your opponent doesn't even have this as an option. Getting rid of the Calamity is very important. You can also DD Crow the Femina when your opponent goes Urgula target Femina, because you don't want your opponent to also be able to get this back in rotation. That's the biggest thing with the Rahu and the combo, is they just dump the Urgula and then they send the Femina, and your opponent is going to get the double set and then be able to add back the Femina. So you want to make sure that you get rid of that with something like DD Crow. Bell onto the traps is going to be your best option here, of course, getting rid of the Flame or the Sting, whichever one hurts worse. If you're on double Cyclone still, which you probably should be, then you don't really have to worry about Flame as much. You can save it for Sting, but of course you're not always going to have Bell in for those situations, or you're not going to see them both in tandem, so hitting the traps is very strong. I definitely am trying to hit Rahu. I think this is a lot more potent than like the branded Fusion. Of course, if you see one of the other first, you're just going to drop it immediately. It doesn't matter which one. If they show you Rahu, if they show you Branded Fusion, you're going to Ash. It's just like no contest going to happen, right? So whichever one you see first is definitely going to be fine. You can also think about saving negation for something like Grand Guignol, just so your opponent can't dump like Archlord Christian on you and reborn it. Which is why you also want to think about saving Bell for something like Fallen and Virtuous in your draw phase, because your opponent will try to just bring back like a Floodgate, right? So that's something that you might want to hold Bell for the entire time, just so you don't get floodgated. That's the same thing with DD Crow, like a Bestial. that you can wait on, because that could be a potential issue. My favorite hit out of any hand trap right now is Ogre onto Ecclesia and the Dark Dragon. This card is an effect to banish itself. It doesn't banish for cost. So if you Ogre this, it's brutal, because they don't get to summon on a deck, then it's engrave, and it's only a one of, so they have to recycle it and then try to get back to it. It just messes up so much. Ogre, this format feels almost like a god card currently. Card is very strong right now, especially into Ecclesia and the Dark Dragon. I'm playing 2 Ogre personally. I think the card is very, very good. Now, you can hit a Lucius if you see that first, but 9 times out of 10, you're just going to go ahead and Valor Imperm the Fallen of the White Dragon, because you don't want your opponent to be able to get to Ecclesia and then be able to extend from there. Because if you like Valor Imperm the Synchro, they just do it again on the next turn, right, and summon Cartesia, and nothing really changes. So you want to make sure that you're hitting preemptively so your opponent can't just get to the Synchro and be able to have unlimited plays. Now, Canine Artmage, there are several different avenues for combo, but you want to make sure that you're just shutting down Medius, because Medius gets to the Owl and the Owl gets to combo, right? Like, these are things that we just don't want to see happen. So that's something where if you can shut down the Medius, go ahead and do so, right? Don't let your opponent just get a free summon out of deck. If your opponent leads Noroi, obviously you're going to shut that down. If your opponent uses Noroi to special from deck, I'm ashing that as well here. I feel like if you see Noroi first or Medius first, you're hitting any of them with Ash, Imperm, Valor, whatever you have, right, is just going to be the thing that you throw. Just because both these cards are so very strong and you want to shut down whatever they're going to do. The Noroi combo now involves 2 Lanterns, so you have to like summon Lantern off Noroi now. So you just don't want your opponent to be able to get a ton of free advantage, right? And then, of course, being able to go into Ripper. So at that point, you kind of have to use your hand trap. It reminds me very much of, like, Connector back in the day, right? Like, you have to respond to this. You can definitely snipe the Assault with Ogre, but I like going after the Field Spell. The Field Spell is just really good for the add. And then the additional normal is just like an inherent effect of the card, right? But a lot of times they're adding first, so you can go ahead and just like snipe it with Ogre, and then they just don't have the free summon, right? Unless they use it immediately, which is less likely. Ogre on the Lantern target, of course, to not let your opponent just free extend. And then the Latera, you want to go ahead and Bell. A lot of times this is going to be on your own turn that you Bell this, because they're trying to get to another card from grave. That makes it easier for them to play on your turn and get into more fusions. It depends on how far along they're going to get in their canine package, because of course if there's like a Ripper, then you need to answer that as well. But you want to make sure that you have something like Bell for the Latera, just so your opponent doesn't have the option to be able to Reborn and get to any fusion that they want to get to, because that can be an issue. If your opponent does get to the Branded Lost Trap, then you can always save Ash for that, but a lot of times you're kind of forced to use Ash if you see Noroi or Medius first. Now, as for DDD, this deck is very interesting. It has a very combo-centric game plan, but you can shut it down in several ways. One of the things that you'll always want to do in this deck is Valor or Imperm Gilgamesh. If you only have one Valor or Imperm, I always recommend that you save it for Gilgamesh, because of the fact that this card is going to net your opponent pendulums, and that's something that you do not want to happen. Now, if you have Ogre, the card that I've been talking about this whole video, hit the Zero King. The card's very strong, going to allow a lot for your opponent, so make sure that you have Ogre for that. You can definitely Ash the Kepler. If you want to hit the contract that it gets out, you can. I like hitting Kepler just because it's so versatile. I'd rather just get rid of this, because I don't want my opponent to have the option to even get to something like the Zero King, right? I'd rather just be able to stop it immediately and not worry about it. You can definitely Bell the Necro Slime. If you want to DD Crow preemptively, unlike the Necro Slime, definitely go ahead and do so. You can also Bell or Crow the Lance Soldier, which I think is definitely worthwhile to do. This card is a crazy good extender for the deck, and something that you really don't want them to have. So if you can get rid of this early on, I definitely recommend it. Now, if you run into Fallen Swordsoul, this is something that you're going to want to make sure that you understand. So if your opponent uses the Fallen of the White Dragon and then pitches Mirror Jade, goes on summon Ecclesia, this is something where if you see like Taya hit the board, preemptively DD Crow the Mirror Jade. It's a worm that can banish it and go into combo. this deck is very cool and you're going to see it. It's going to be around, I promise. Swordsoul is like a fan favorite deck. Someone's going to be playing this at a big event. It's going to be around. You want to Ash the Ecclesia. You want to Bell Fallen, because this is essentially just like hitting it with Ash, because it works from hand, deck, or grave. So that's something that you can go ahead and just shut down. But negate the Ecclesia, banish the Mirror Jade, and then stop like the Taya from coming out, because at that point they're going to be able to go full combo, because these new cards are crazy extenders. They are so good, and I think this deck is actually like low-key sleeper, like really, really good. Now, very similar with the K9 cards, you can go ahead and just stop the target of Lantern with DD Crow, or Bell the Lantern. You can also Bell Rock, which is pretty good. Ash, Rosin, or Soul. Ogre on start, right? Ogre is very good right now. I think this card is definitely something that is worth the 2 of spot in your main deck. If you're playing like 3 Ash, 3 Fua, let's say you're on like Impulse, right? And then play like 2 Droll and 2 Ogre, right? Even if you're playing the Impulse, like we've already seen this several times over. We've seen Malice lists that were on like Nibiru, Valor, and Impulse, just because it's like, if you see them, right, they're still very strong, which is something very interesting, and I don't necessarily agree, but they have had lists so far that have topped with things like that in them. So not necessarily too shocking, right? But 2 Droll and 2 Ogre this format is like real comfy to have in your main deck, especially if it's like 2 Ogre, 2 Droll, 2 Bell, 3 Ash, 3 Fua. Like, that's a really solid Handtrap lineup right now. And then if you're really worried about it, I'd probably side the playset of Mourner, but people are just straight up playing a playset of Mourner right now too. And then Valor Imperium onto the Noroi. Then just Lunalight as a refresher, because you will still see this deck. This will be the preemptive DD Crow onto Yellow Martin. You'll go ahead and Ghost Bell the Masquerade effect, or you can just Ogre it. You can also just Ogre Masquerade, or you can Ogre Wolf, which is also very strong. Shutting down the Silverhound with Ash or Impulse, and then Valor Imperium onto Gold Leo. That has not changed. Definitely go ahead and check out my Twitter, Twitch, Discord, Instagram if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it, and I'll catch you all next video. Thank you.